stop whatever you were doing right now. Because what has been happening inside the Cleveland Browns organization over the last 60 days, the departures, the releases, the free agent signings, the trade rumors, the draft speculation, the quarterback chaos, the Myles Garrett bombshell, the Jerry Jeudy situation, the David Njoku farewell, the offensive line overhaul, and the cascading series of roster decisions that have stunned a fan base that thought it had already seen everything this franchise was capable of delivering in terms of shock and surprise. All of it has been building toward a draft night that could either cement the foundation of a genuine rebuild or send Cleveland spinning back into the darkness that has defined so much of its modern football history. This is the most consequential offseason the Cleveland Browns have had in years. And the fans, the long-suffering, perpetually hopeful, perpetually heartbroken fans of Cleveland, Ohio, are watching all of it with a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and the specific kind of guarded optimism that only develops in a city that has been through exactly this kind of thing before and knows deep in its bones how quickly hope can turn to heartbreak. If you bleed brown and orange, if you care about what happens to this roster between now and draft night, if you want to understand every single move that has been made and every single move that is still coming, this is the video you need to watch. Every departure, every signing, every trade rumor, every draft speculation, every piece of the chaos that is reshaping Cleveland's roster before the most important night of the year. Subscribe right now and do not move, because we are going through all of it. To understand the full magnitude of what is happening to the Cleveland Browns roster in the 2026 offseason, you have to start with the diagnosis. You have to understand what the problem was, the specific, measurable, undeniable offensive catastrophe that defined Cleveland's 2025 season and made the roster overhaul that is currently underway not just desirable, but absolutely necessary. The Browns finished 5-12 in 2025, fifth from the bottom of the entire NFL, dead last in the AFC North, a division where competition is fierce and unforgiving. Kevin Stefanski was fired immediately following the season, and the offensive numbers, the numbers that tell the story of why the 5-12 happened, were staggering in their badness. Cleveland's young offensive core, led by tight end Harold Fannin, quarterback Shedeur Sanders, wide receiver Isaiah Bond, and running backs Quinshawn Judkins and Dylan Sampson, showed promise, but the infrastructure around them was broken. The offensive line was a disaster. The wide receiver production was among the worst in the league. The quarterback situation was a three-ring circus of Watson's injury, Gabriel's concussion, and Sanders' rocky introduction to the NFL. And hovering over all of it was the $230 million guaranteed contract of Deshaun Watson, a financial anchor that had constrained every roster decision the franchise had made since 2022 and would continue to constrain them into 2026 and beyond.
The Browns' 2025 season was a study in extremes, defined by a historic defensive effort that was ultimately undermined by a toothless offense. The team finished with a disappointing 5-12 record. Clutch points. Think about that phrase for a moment. A toothless offense. On the same team as Myles Garrett, who set the NFL record with 23 sacks and once again recorded a pressure rate near the top of the league? Sharp football analysis. The greatest defensive player in the history of the Cleveland Browns franchise broke the all-time single-season sack record in 2025, and his team went 5-12 because the offense couldn't score enough points to let the defense win games. That is the specific and agonizing context in which the 2026 roster overhaul began. New head coach Todd Monken walked through the doors of the Browns facility in Berea, Ohio, in January 2026, with a mandate so clear it didn't need to be spoken aloud. Fix the offense, build the infrastructure, protect the quarterback. Give Myles Garrett the offensive partner his defensive excellence has always deserved. And General Manager Andrew Berry, who had publicly pledged significant roster turnover on the offensive side, began executing that mandate with a speed and decisiveness that surprised even veteran Browns observers. But before the signings came the departures, and the departures hit Cleveland fans hard. David Njoku's 9-year run in Cleveland officially came to an end after he and the team were unable to agree on an extension. Dog Pound Daily. 9 years, 9 seasons of being one of the most athletically gifted tight ends in the league, one of the most beloved players in the locker room, one of the few faces of the franchise during some of the darkest chapters of Cleveland's modern football story. Njoku had posted a farewell message to Browns fans in February, letting them know of his plans to test free agency. Dog Pound Daily. The farewell was gracious and emotional. The fan response was exactly what you would expect when a franchise icon walks out the door. A mixture of genuine sadness and reluctant understanding that the business of football requires decisions that have nothing to do with loyalty or affection. The reason for Njoku's departure was straightforward, even if it was painful. Njoku carries a massive $24.3 million cap charge for 2026. Because his deal is set to void, Cleveland faces a binary choice: extend him to spread the hit, or absorb the financial blow now. Dog Pound Daily. With a franchise desperately trying to rebuild its offensive infrastructure around younger, cheaper, more controllable assets, absorbing $24 million in cap space on a 29-year-old tight end who had seen his production decline, while his replacement, Harold Fannin Jr., was already performing at a Pro Bowl level as a 21-year-old rookie, was a luxury the Browns simply could not afford. Fannin's emergence as the team's top pass catcher makes Njoku's role expendable. The Browns would be better off relocating those funds to the O-line and wide receiver groups. Dog Pound Daily.
Rational? Absolutely. Emotionally satisfying for a fan base that watched Njoku give everything he had to a franchise that spent years failing to put a winning product around him? Not even close. But Njoku was not alone in his departure. The Cleveland Browns in the 2026 offseason have been conducting what can only be described as a comprehensive generational cleansing, moving on from veterans whose contracts no longer make sense in the context of a genuine rebuild, and replacing them with younger, cheaper, more versatile options that fit what Todd Monken's offense requires. The Browns are officially moving on from right tackle Jack Conklin after his contract was restructured in 2025 to allow him to hit free agency early. He'll still cost the Browns a $12.9 million cap charge in 2026 as a straight release. Dog Pound Daily. Conklin's tenure in Cleveland had been defined by the cruelest recurring theme in professional football: talent sabotaged by injury. Injuries defined Conklin's tenure in Cleveland, as he missed 44 of a possible 101 games. Dog Pound Daily. When healthy, Conklin was among the better offensive tackles in the NFL. The problem was that healthy was the exception and not the rule, and a franchise trying to protect its young quarterback investment cannot build around a tackle whose availability cannot be trusted. Similar to Njoku, Wyatt Teller will be designated as a post-June 1 release for salary cap purposes. His 2025 season felt like a Cleveland swan song, with injuries limiting his production and the younger Tevin Jenkins mysteriously stealing reps down the stretch. Dog Pound Daily. Teller had been one of the most consistent and celebrated offensive linemen in Cleveland during his tenure, a legitimate Pro Bowl guard who gave the franchise years of reliable, high-quality play. But Father Time is undefeated. The injuries were mounting, and the organizational direction had shifted toward youth and flexibility. Teller's departure was another emotional moment dressed up in the cold language of salary cap management. And then there was the situation with Jerry Jeudy, the $52 million investment that has become one of the most uncomfortable topics in Cleveland football. The lack of chemistry between Sanders and number 1 wide receiver Jerry Jeudy was painfully obvious in 2025. With Sanders firmly in play to win Cleveland's QB1 job for 2026, the team should be seeking an exit plan from their $52 million letdown.
Jeudy had a Pro Bowl season in 2024 working with Jameis Winston, but it didn't do the Browns much good. He took a brutal step back in 2025. Dog Pound Daily.
The Jeudy situation is more complicated than a simple cut because of the contract structure. Cutting Jeudy with a post-June designation would only result in a manageable $2 million dead cap hit, according to Over the Cap. That number makes a post-draft release entirely possible if Cleveland uses its first-round picks to add elite wide receiver talent, which is exactly what the draft rumors are pointing toward. According to Pro Football Focus, Jeudy dropped 9 passes last season, posting a drop rate of 15.3%, the third time in 6 years that he's had a drop rate in the double digits. A wide receiver who drops double-digit percentages of catchable passes is not a wide receiver you can build an offense around. And with Todd Monken designing a system that depends on timing, rhythm, and the ability of receivers to hold on to the football when it arrives on schedule, Jeudy's drop rate is not just a statistics problem, it is a philosophical problem. If Cleveland does take 2 pass catchers early in the draft, Jeudy could immediately become expendable. The Browns are high on Isaiah Bond, and they're not going to give up on him after he didn't even have a proper training camp as a rookie. Bond, the young receiver who flashed elite deep ball ability in his brief opportunities with Sanders last season, represents exactly the kind of young, cheap, developing talent that the franchise is trying to accumulate around its quarterback. Draft 2 receivers in April, give them the snaps, develop the chemistry with Sanders, and cut ties with a $52 million disappointment who never found the connection with his quarterbacks. That is the plan. And draft night is when it either gets executed or gets complicated. Now let's talk about what the Browns have added, because the departures only tell half the story. The other half, the construction half, the hopeful half, the part of the offseason that gave Cleveland fans genuine reason to believe that the organizational vision is real and the investment is serious, that half is about the offensive line revolution that Andrew Barry has conducted with a speed and financial commitment that nobody fully anticipated. In the weeks leading up to the 2026 NFL Draft, the Browns added 3 significant offensive linemen in free agency. Each acquisition represented a direct acknowledgement of the catastrophic protection failures that had undermined every quarterback in Cleveland last season. Former Chargers guard Zion Johnson reached agreement on a 3-year, $49.5 million deal, including $32.4 million guaranteed with the Cleveland Browns. Johnson is a former first-round pick, the 17th overall selection in the 2022 draft, who brings legitimate starting-caliber talent to a guard position that was among the worst in the league last year. The price tag raised some eyebrows, particularly given that the Chargers let him walk, but for a team that allowed its offensive tackles to surrender 21 sacks with 36 penalties in a single season, the investment in protection is hard to argue with. The Browns bolstered their offensive line with additions including Titus Howard and Elgton Jenkins. Sharp Football Analysis, Titus Howard is a former first-round pick from the Houston Texans, a versatile lineman who can play multiple positions and brings the kind of experience and physical ability that Cleveland desperately needed after a season in which 4 different starting tackles allowed pressure rates of 8% or higher. Elgton Jenkins brings similar versatility and a reputation as one of the more complete blockers available in free agency, though injury concerns limited his availability in 2025. Together, these 3 additions represent the most significant offensive line investment Cleveland has made in years, and the explicit purpose of that investment is to give whoever wins the quarterback competition, Shedeur Sanders most likely, the time and protection to actually show what he can do. Because here is the fundamental football truth that the Browns organization finally seems to have internalized. You cannot evaluate a quarterback fairly when the people in front of him are playing at the worst level in the league. You cannot determine what Shedeur Sanders is capable of when he is running for his life behind tackles who allow 15% pressure rates. The offensive line overhaul is not just a roster upgrade, it is a necessary precondition for an honest quarterback evaluation.
It is the Browns saying, "We want to know what Shedeur Sanders actually is, and to know that, we need to protect him properly." Finally. The Browns also agreed to terms with former Ravens wide receiver Tylan Wallace and re-signed tight end Blake Whiteheart on a one-year deal. Dog pound daily, Wallace, coming from Baltimore's offense, brings a familiarity with Monken's system that could accelerate his integration into Cleveland's receiving corps. The connection between Monken and players he has worked with in Baltimore is a recurring theme in this offseason, and it reflects the new head coach's desire to surround himself and his quarterback with people who already understand the vocabulary of his offense. The Browns were able to land a versatile player in Tevin Jenkins, who they reportedly tried to trade for, a former top 40 pick who performed well in pass protection for Shedeur Sanders, with a pass block win rate at guard of 94.4% that would have ranked 17th last season. Dog pound daily, Jenkins is exactly the kind of retention move that often gets overlooked in the headline-driven world of NFL roster analysis. A young, improving player who demonstrated real chemistry with the franchise quarterback and who the team was willing to invest in keeping rather than losing to free agency. That kind of continuity matters. That kind of relationship between a lineman and his quarterback matters, and the Browns recognized it and acted on it.
Now let's talk about the draft rumors, because they have been building toward a crescendo that arrives in just days. And what Cleveland does with its 2 first-round picks on draft night will either validate or complicate everything Berry and Monken are trying to build. GM Andrew Berry told reporter Mary Kay Cabot that he doesn't know if Cleveland will be using their 6th pick in the 2026 NFL Draft and may trade down instead. Berry also admitted that he has no idea who the Browns will be taking if they keep the 6th pick. Enforce the sport. That level of public uncertainty from a general manager about his own first-round pick is either genuine or strategic, and given Berry's track record, it is almost certainly both. He genuinely does not know who will be available at 6 because the picks before Cleveland will determine what is left on the board. And he is strategically keeping every option open because the moment he publicly commits to a player or a position, his leverage in potential trade negotiations disappears. Last year, Berry and the Browns passed up on drafting 2025 Heisman Trophy winner and former Colorado Buffalo Travis Hunter when they traded the 2nd pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars. In return, Cleveland not only got the Jaguars' 2026 first-round pick, but they also got defensive tackle Mason Graham and running back Quinshon Judkins, who were key pieces of Cleveland's vaunted 2025 rookie class. That trade, which looked controversial at the time, now looks like one of Berry's best decisions because the assets acquired have helped build the foundation of a genuinely talented young roster. And now those same assets are contributing to Cleveland's position at pick 6 in 2026. The chess game continues. This year's rumors are generally about the wide receiver and offensive tackle positions, with many believing that the Browns will actually trade down from the 6th overall pick. ESPN Cleveland host Tony Rizzo said he heard Cleveland is leaning toward drafting offensive tackle Monroe Freeling at the top of the draft. Dogs by nature. Monroe Freeling, an offensive tackle who would immediately address one of Cleveland's most glaring remaining needs, elite pass protection on the left side, with a premium pick. That choice, if it is made, would be the capstone of an entire offseason dedicated to building a proper environment for a young quarterback's development. Wide receiver and offensive tackle are Cleveland's glaring needs at 2 prominent offensive positions. GM Andrew Berry reminded reporters at the NFL's annual league meetings that the Browns may no longer hold the number 6 pick when all is said and done. Dog pound daily. A trade down would allow Cleveland to accumulate additional picks while still landing a franchise-caliber tackle and a wide receiver, potentially giving Shedeur Sanders his first legitimate number 1 receiver, something he has never had in his professional career. Wide receiver Carnell Tate is reportedly dropping in draft boards, dogs by nature, which could be good news for Cleveland if they can snag him later in the first round with their 2nd pick at 24. Tate,
The Ohio State product, who would play in front of his home state fans, has the route-running precision and hands that Monken's offense values. His connection to a potential hometown franchise quarterback would be a storyline that writes itself. And if Jeudy is released post-draft, as many expect, Tate walking in as the presumptive WR1 from day one of training camp is not a far-fetched scenario. There was also the lingering Myles Garrett situation, which has generated more heat than almost any other roster storyline this offseason. There have been trade rumors about Garrett this offseason, but assuming he is still on the roster, the Browns will continue to have one of the best pass rushers in the league. Sharp football analysis. The fact that this sentence exists, the fact that assuming he is still on the roster is even a phrase that needs to be written about Myles Garrett, tells you everything about the level of uncertainty and chaos that has surrounded the Cleveland Browns in 2026. NFL Network insider Mike Garafolo reported the Browns were adamant they weren't trading Garrett, and Barry said the single-season sack king would be with Cleveland for the rest of his career. NFL. Barry restructured Garrett's contract, which sparked trade rumors, which then had to be aggressively knocked down by the front office in a very public way. The Garrett situation added an element of drama to an offseason that already had more drama than most franchises experience in a decade. Why did the trade rumors even start? Because when you are rebuilding an offense, when you are spending money on offensive linemen and collecting draft picks and trying to fix everything that was broken about the Browns' attack in 2025, there is always a question lurking in the background about whether the assets you have on the defensive side could be converted into more offensive building blocks. Myles Garrett, in the right trade, could theoretically return enough draft capital to accelerate the offensive rebuild by years. The calculus is simple, even if the execution would be emotionally devastating for every person who has ever watched a Cleveland Browns game. But Barry said no. Garrett stays. And with the defensive roster around him getting younger and deeper, led by Defensive Player of the Year Myles Garrett and Defensive Rookie of the Year Carson Schwessinger, CBSSports.com, the foundation for sustained defensive excellence is being maintained, even as the offense gets rebuilt around it.
The picture that emerges from all of this, from the departures of Njoku, Conklin, and Teller, from the arrivals of Johnson, Howard, and Jenkins, from the Jeudy situation still unresolved pending draft night, from the Garrett trade rumors firmly put to rest, from the 2 first-round picks pointed at wide receiver and offensive tackle, from the quarterback competition involving Sanders, Watson, and Gabriel, is the picture of a franchise that has finally, genuinely decided to do the hard work of rebuilding correctly. Not by chasing a quick fix, not by throwing money at a veteran quarterback who might bring respectability for one season before the wheels fall off again, but by building the infrastructure, the offensive line, the receiver core, the coaching staff, the system that lets the young quarterback they have develop into the franchise quarterback they need. Cleveland's decision to pass on a bidding war to sign top free agent quarterback Malik Willis was an immediate win for Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson, and Dylan Gabriel. Insider Albert Breer stated that the Browns are essentially punting at the quarterback position. That's a bad look for the franchise, but it's a clear win for Sanders. The second-year pro should get a real chance to win the starting job this summer. Dog Pound Daily. When you strip away all the noise, the Watson comeback narrative, the Gabriel long shot, the draft speculation about possibly adding a 4th quarterback, the clearest signal coming out of Cleveland is that this organization believes Shedeur Sanders is their answer. Not a guaranteed answer, not a crowned answer, but the answer they are betting on, the answer they are building around, the answer they are protecting with $49.5 million contracts for offensive guards and first-round picks earmarked for tackles and receivers. Owner Jimmy Haslam emphasized, "First of all, I'm not making the decision. Todd will make that decision, and I assure you he's going to go on who can win the most games first." Pro Football Network.
That is the standard. Win games. Everything else, the money, the age, the popularity, the draft position, the family name, none of it matters unless you can win football games. And the entire off-season apparatus being built around the Cleveland Browns quarterback competition is designed to create the conditions in which the right man to win games can identify himself clearly and undeniably. The roster shakeup has been stunning in its scope and its speed. Beloved veterans gone, expensive linemen arrived, draft picks lined up like tools waiting to be deployed, a quarterback competition that has captured the attention of the entire NFL, a defensive superstar whose trade rumors were loudly denied, a wide receiver situation that is one draft night away from being completely transformed, and a new head coach standing in the middle of all of it with a clear vision, a clear philosophy, and the pedigree to execute it.
Draft night is days away. The chaos is about to reach its peak. And when the smoke clears, when the picks are in and the roster begins to take its final shape, Cleveland Browns fans are either going to be looking at the foundation of something genuinely special or looking at another chapter in the franchise's long history of almost but not quite. The roster shakeup has stunned them. The question now is whether it has also saved them. Watch draft night closely, because the answer begins there. Disclaimer: this video is based entirely on publicly available reporting, verified statements, and roster transaction data related to the Cleveland Browns 2026 offseason, as reported by established NFL media outlets including ESPN, Fox Sports, NFL.com, Cleveland.com, Dogs by Nature, Dog Pound Daily, Clutch Points, Yahoo Sports, and Sports Illustrated. All financial figures are sourced from over-the-cap and publicly reported contract data. This content represents journalistic storytelling and analysis based on information available as of April 10, 2026. Ongoing developments may alter the situations described. All subjects are presumed innocent of any wrongdoing not established by legal proceedings. This video is for informational and entertainment purposes only.